Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mars 2020 Perseverance Talk. We have a great program for you today. I'm very excited for it. This is part of our adult summer reading program, and so if you want to check out more about that, you can go to ocls.info/ocl or ocls.info/ASR, and I am going to drop that link right here for you in the comments. And this counts as one of our ASR programs. So for every program you attend, if you're an OCLS cardholder, you can get an entry into our giveaway. And so this includes this program right here. So you can already get an entry by attending this program. And also at the end of the program, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you thought about today's program, I'm dropping the link for our survey as well. And also, if you could let us know in that if there are any future events that you'd like to see coming up. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring on Derek. NASA's Mars 2020 Perseverance rover, scheduled for a July 20 launch date, will look for signs of past microbial life, cache rock, and soil samples, and prepare for future human exploration. Learn about the rover and its mission from Derek Demeter, Planetarium Director at Seminole State College. So please welcome Derek. Hey.
Hey, everyone. Glad to see all of you virtually. And thank you, Sarah, for inviting me out to speak tonight about Mars 2020 Perseverance, and including Ingenuity, which we'll talk about a little bit later on as well. So, just a couple of information. There looks to be, I'll talk more about this in greater detail. The launch date has changed, unfortunately, due to some technical details with the ULA Delta rocket. So right now they're looking at potentially July 30th as a launch date and into August. And I'll go into more detail about how we launch a rocket to Mars and the difficulties of going to Mars, because we can't necessarily just launch a rocket, willy-nilly. We have to find a particular time in the placement of both Mars and Earth and get it there with the least amount of time. So I'll go into why we have this launch window and why it's important to launch now. Otherwise, we have to wait almost 2 years to send this rocket again. So I think right now, ULA is working really hard to try to resolve some of the issues with their launch vehicle, and hopefully we'll be able to send something to Mars. So that'll be pretty cool.
All right, so I'm going to hand it over entirely to Derek, but if you have any questions, hold them into the end. We're going to do a Q&A session at the end of the program, and you can just drop those in the comments near the end, and we'll cover those. But take it away, Derek.
All right, thank you, Sarah. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and present my get my PowerPoint here for you. So we're going to be again looking at Perseverance. This is a new Mars exploration rover that's going to be looking at a particular area called the Jezero Crater, and I'm going to talk more about why this is the case. Why do we want to go to this location? Why is it important to look at some of the mission objectives? The end goal of all of this is really to look at early Mars, to look at its history, and of course, to look forward into the future when we want to send humans to Mars. That's the total goal of this whole thing, is how do we explore Mars and learn more about Mars, so that way the end goal, somebody who might be watching here tonight might end up going to Mars, or know somebody who might go to Mars. So it's pretty cool that we're building this. And of course, so far, Mars is the only planet that is completely inhabited by robots. Yes, we have a planet of robots. Yes, there are several different types of robots on Mars, and unfortunately, there's only one currently that is active. All the other robots that we've sent to Mars are no longer active, and they're just basically sitting there on the surface. But we have visited many different times on the planet Mars, and this is a really nice picture taken by the Viking spacecraft of the planet Mars. This is a really interesting geological feature that you can see here. This is the Valles Marineris. Now, it's not made out of marinara sauce, but this is a large rift valley. A long time ago, we learned that Mars was like Earth, and it had almost kind of like a, not quite a complex plate tectonic system that we have here on Earth, but it did have some plate movement. And over time, this area of Mars was actually separating. And what happened is that you have this large rift valley. And what's really interesting about this rift valley is that this rift valley is the length of the entire United States. So you could basically put, you know, New York here and LA over here, and that'd be essentially the length of this canyon. It is the largest canyon in the solar system. If you think of our largest canyon on Earth, the Grand Canyon is only about 200 miles in length. This thing over 2,000 miles in length. So you can see just how much more massive this canyon truly is. But anyways, we also, if we look closely here at this image, we have these large volcanoes. I'll talk more about these a little bit later on. We also have this large kind of ocean basin. We actually found that there used to be ancient oceans on Mars. Syrtis Major is the name of it. And there's several other large, interesting geological features on the planet as well. But this is a view of Mars seen from a spacecraft that's really close to the surface of Mars. But you can actually observe Mars here on Earth. In fact, it is up in the sky in the early morning. If you get up around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe you're one of those early risers trying to get up before the brutal heat of the day and maybe do your run or walk your dog or whatever the case may be, and you look over to the east-southeast side of the sky, you may see a brightish, kind of orangey, bronzy colored star, and that's Mars. And if you have a telescope at home, you can actually see Mars in the sky. There it is. This is actually an image that I've taken with my telescope here on Earth. And this is the red planet Mars. You can see there's the ice cap and some of the other features on the surface. You can actually see Mars through a telescope, which is really cool. So if you have a telescope at home, you want to go out early in the morning, set up that telescope and look at Mars. And as we get later in the year, when we get into like September and October, Mars will be up much earlier in the evening. So you don't have to wait till 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning to see Mars. So, so hopefully you get a chance to look at that. You get a chance to observe that through a telescope. And we do, unfortunately, right now, we don't have any virtual star parties right now, but we're going to kick those back in starting in September. And we'll be doing a whole event related to the planet Mars. So, and this will be a virtual event. We'll be doing some virtual stargazing. So hopefully by then we'll be able to take a look at Mars. And this is actually important because later on you'll see why this time of the year would actually be a good time to launch a spacecraft to Mars, because we're actually getting closer to Mars ever so slightly as we go day by day. And when we get to September, Mars will be at its closest to Earth. We call that the Mars opposition. And so the closest to Earth makes your travel a lot less. And what you want to do is you want to launch the rocket a few months before we reach that closest approach, so it has a little bit of an extra time ahead to make its way closer to Mars. So again, I'll go more in detail about that a little bit later on when we get into the rest of the program. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other missions we've sent to Mars. Remember, I told you that Mars is a planet inhabited by robots. It's the world of the robots. But we've also sent spacecraft to Mars. The first ever spacecraft sent to another planet is Mariner 9. This was in competition with another spacecraft, the USSR, or that time Soviet Union. Now Russia was sending a spacecraft called Mars 2, but we beat it. In the United States, we were the first, and we didn't land this, but we allowed this spacecraft to orbit around Mars. But when it got to Mars, it was experiencing a very, very, very intense dust storm. Mars gets these really intense dust storms where sometimes the entire surface is skewed by dust. It makes it very hard for you to see the surface. So it actually was put into hibernation mode for a little bit. And then once the dust storm settled and it got clear again, Mariner 9 was able to kick back in and start taking images of the red planet surface. And so Mariner 9, this was the first time we've ever sent our photographed another planet from close proximity. So this was a milestone for space exploration in the solar system. So pretty cool. And once we got past Mariner 9, we started to send other missions. In 1975, we sent the Viking 1, and Viking 1 was a combination of both a orbiter, like you see here, as well as a lander. So unlike the other one where we just basically orbited around the planet, we took some pictures from orbit, this time we actually sent an orbiter, or excuse me, a lander down to the surface, which is really cool. And then in 1976, we also sent Viking 2, and this is a picture from the Viking 2 lander. And this is the first time we've been able to actually take samples of the surface. You can actually see there's the scoop here, and we made some scoop shovel. We shoveled some dirt, and we took some samples of the surface of Mars. And one of the questions that was asked during the Viking missions was, is there life on Mars? You probably remember the David Bowie song, Life on Mars. Is there life on Mars? Well, that was actually a big question back in that time. And right now, we haven't found any evidence of life on Mars. In fact, actually, scientists believe the surface of Mars contains a lot of volatile chemicals in it that actually make life really difficult on the surface of Mars, which is kind of bad news. Could life exist on Mars? Definitely not on the surface. The other thing we discovered is that Mars has a very thin atmosphere, very thin. And it does not have a magnetic field. And those two things combined together make it very dangerous for life because the sun generates a lot of ultraviolet radiation. That's why we got to put sunscreen on this time of year, because the ultraviolet radiation of the sun is intense. But imagine that ultraviolet light. See, most of it's actually filtered by our Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere. Imagine a huge 100% burst of ultraviolet radiation coming off the sun, hitting the surface. This will sterilize the planet. And so unfortunately, Viking spent a lot of time figuring out that basically the surface of Mars is just not a great place for life. Now, the question is that if life does exist on Mars, could it very likely be happening underground? And that's actually something that Perseverance, as well as future missions to Mars, including manned missions or human missions to Mars, will be able to answer. So human space flight, hopefully those people that land on Mars will actually be able to maybe dig underneath the soil, be able to find ancient caverns and things like that, and maybe find life. But right now, we think that the surface of Mars just isn't the best place to find life, if there is life there. So we go to 1997. The Viking 2 and Viking 1 landers, they were permanent installations, if you will. They couldn't move. They basically landed. They were stationary. They couldn't do anything. But JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, part of NASA, wanted to build a vehicle that could move, a rover. And the Pathfinder mission, which is what Sojourner was part of, the Pathfinder mission landed on Mars, and it had this little tiny rover on it called Sojourner, which you see here in the image. And Sojourner, its main mission was very simple. Can you move a rover around Mars? That's it. It didn't have anything else. It wasn't trying to collect samples of anything. It wasn't trying to dig anything. Its job was primarily, can we do it? And the answer was absolutely, we can do it. We can drive, we can tell it, we can send it commands, we can tell it where to go, and sure enough it did. And this is an image here of Sojourner next to a famous rock formation on Mars called Yogi Bear. And if you look closely at the image here, you can see kind of a shape of a bear's nose, its ear, and its kind of wrinkly neck, kind of looks like a grizzly bear. If you use your imagination, you might be able to see it. Or, hey, you might be able to see other things in here too. And there's all kinds of different funny names. There's Yogi Bear. There's all kinds of fun, interesting names of some of the rocks that are located in this area on Mars. So right now we've determined that obviously we can send a rover to Mars. Well, what's the next plan? Well, the next plan is, okay, we can do it. Let's actually make these rovers actually do something. Let's make them actually look for signs of stuff. And the first one to do that were twin rovers, the MERs, Mars Exploration Rovers. Spirit and Opportunity launched in 2004, only a 90-day mission, but lasting well over 15 years. That's way worth the money, if you will. And both Spirit and Opportunity, their mission was to look for traces of water in early Mars. So when we sent satellites to Mars, like the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and when we were mapping out in great detail the surface of Mars, we discovered that the surface of Mars has a lot of evidence of ancient water. We find riverbeds, we find lakes, we find erosion, we find even ice on the surface of Mars, and we now know that Mars was covered with water. So we wanted to ask ourselves the question of, well, just to make sure, let's send something down to the surface and look for any and really verify that these places we're looking at from orbit are actually carved and transformed by water. And sure enough, Spirit landed in a crater, an ancient lake crater, and found evidence of beach erosion and lots of different things. Actually, I think it was Opportunity, not Spirit. I get those two mixed up. Spirit, though, looked at actually more of a lava field, looking for evidence of an active planet. So actually, both Spirit and Opportunity were looking for two signs. They were looking at was Mars Earth-like at one time, and it did. It found evidence of volcanic eruptions, of lava flow. It also found evidence of polished rocks and beach erosion and clay deposits, all the things you need for moving water, beaches, oceans, lakes, whatever you want to, a lake, waves crashing on the shore of a lake, all the evidence you need for liquid water on the surface of a planet. So this was really exciting. And both Spirit and Opportunity, being able that they were mobile, they were rovers, they were able to travel around. Their weakness, unfortunately, was the fact that they were solar powered. And solar power is great, but the problem is that, like you saw with Mariner 9, Mars has a lot of dust storms. And unfortunately, Spirit and Opportunity can only do so much. And one of the things they can't do is they can't just constantly brush off all this dust, just accumulates over time. And the solar cells will slowly not be as efficient with collecting sunlight. And over time, though, it got weaker and weaker and weaker. It wasn't able to charge their batteries. And basically what happened is that both Spirit and Opportunity just stopped. Spirit, though, unfortunately, was going over, since it was in a very lava, basalt-rich, very hard and really rough terrain. It damaged a lot of its wheels. It got stuck, and it was not a good time. Opportunity, though, lasted a lot longer, and it got a chance to take a look at some really neat features like you see here. Again, we see lots of evidence of beach erosion, polished rocks, water flow, all kinds of evidence needed to predict that this was, in fact, a place of water. And as I said, Opportunity eventually, though, it just could not hold a charge anymore. Could not. The solar cells were not as efficient, and we see the last of Opportunity. But the next thing, though, is we decide we want to build a rover that doesn't rely on solar. It's nuclear powered. And this, of course, was Curiosity. But before that, though, we sent a lander, not a rover, but a lander called Phoenix. It was actually part of a Mars Surveyor mission that was resurrected. That's why they call it the Phoenix, because it was resurrected from basically being slashed because of NASA's budget. So they reused this lander here for this new mission. And the purpose of Phoenix was to look for evidence of water in these ice fields in the polar regions of Mars. And to give you an idea where it kind of landed essentially in the area of like northern Alaska. So pretty high up in latitude, kind of on the south side of the large polar ice cap, and it wanted to look for evidence of ice. Now, what I have here is I have a video, And either Sarah or Josh, if you don't mind making sure that I have sound here. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video here. There we go. Whoops. All right, so the Phoenix mission really opened up our view of evidence of water on Mars. And one of the things that was really interesting with the Phoenix lander is it found evidence of not only frozen water. So what happened is Phoenix was actually able to dig underneath the surface, and underneath the actual first surface deposits on Mars, it found evidence of permafrost. Now, what's permafrost? Permafrost is basically permanently frozen soil. So if you go up to high elevation mountains, say like the Rockies in Colorado, and you go up to 14,000 feet and you dig into the surface or into the part of the mountain, you would actually eventually hit basically solid rock, frozen soil called permafrost, because it's basically unexposed to the surface. It has the surface, it's able to absorb the heat and keep it nice and cool. This is exactly what you're going to find in the polar area of Mars, which Phoenix landed in. So it found evidence that there is water and ice deposits on Mars. But one of the most exciting things that Phoenix discovered is that in this area as well, there was salty water, a briny kind of salty mixture. There's all the different kinds of salty minerals found here in the polar region. And being that it's very, very salty in this location, it actually allows for water to remain liquid on Mars. See, Mars doesn't have a very thick atmosphere. And what happens is the atmosphere isn't thick enough to allow for the water molecules to remain liquid. What happens is when the water melts from solid, that the atmosphere is not thick enough to basically keep the water into a liquid form, and it basically immediately what we call sublimates, or turns from solid to gas. And but this salty water, though, with all these salts deposited in the water, allow for the water molecules to be kind of put together, basically held together, and allows for the development of liquid water. So we have this salty, briny mixture. And this was really exciting news, because if we find liquid water on Mars And as the video suggested, we've also found evidence of organics found on Mars. And it's very possible that life could exist in this briny material underneath the surface. So again, as I said before, even though Viking pretty much just looked at the surface and found not really good clues for life, we think that it's very likely that if there's life still on Mars, or there was life on Mars, we're going to find it underneath the surface. So these are areas that we're primarily interested in going forward. Now in 2012, we sent Curiosity to Mars. Here's Curiosity doing its cool selfie there. So there it is. So pretty cool. And Curiosity looked at an area known as Gale Crater. Now Gale Crater is a pretty deep crater that was once thought to be an ancient sea basin. And what's really cool about the Gale Crater area is that there's a lot of geology there. And we have found evidence, again, of water, clay deposits, various different minerals necessary for development of life, for things that made sense that Mars was much more like Earth in early Mars history. So these rovers are showing us that Mars was more Earth-like than it was today. And if it was more Earth-like, could it have developed life? Could it have developed the things necessary for the development of life? These are questions that now Perseverance is going to answer going forward. So here's all the different Mars missions that we have sent and are going to send beyond. You can see here we've sent many different types of orbiters. The ones that are in orange represent spacecraft that were launched by other space organizations. There are many different types of space organizations besides NASA. There's the European Space Agency. There's the Korean Space Agency. United Arab Emirates has their version. China as well. India, the Japanese, JAXA. So lots of different other organizations throughout the Russian Space Agency. So as you can see, this is an international collaboration, a commitment by different other countries around the world to explore Mars. But as you can see, the United States has done a very good job of sending different types of missions, including the Mars Odyssey, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MAVEN, which is looking at the atmosphere of Mars, Opportunity, Curiosity, InSight, which is really exciting. Going to be it's currently looking at the seismology or the planetary activeness, if you will, of Mars. We have HOPE, which is United Arab Emirates. China is going to be launching a Mars orbiter as well as a lander, and the ExoMars rover is going to be on Mars as well. But what's really cool going into the future is that we are going to send other missions that will actually be collecting samples taken by the Mars 2020 rover. So, and of course, as you can see here, China is also looking at sending a Mars sample return. So, as you can see, right now, the timetables, we saw the earliest forms of space, exploration on Mars was to look for water. As we get into later missions, we see that we're wanting to see, Mars, is it habitable for life on, for humans? And of course, now when we come with Mars 2020, could there have been life? And right now we've answered the two questions. Yes, Mars does have water. It did have water, liquid water. It does have water today, mostly in ice, but there is some briny liquid water on the surface. It has all the conditions necessary for the development of life, especially in the past. And now our goal is to look for evidence. Was there life on Mars at a time? And then, of course, if we look at all that, it's also going to be preparing our missions to go to Mars. So this is a really exciting time that we live in when visiting the red planet. So here it is. There's Perseverance, and you can see that Perseverance and Curiosity look alike. And well, that's because it is. It's built off of the same framework as Curiosity. Why not? Why do you have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch when you can utilize different types of systems and techniques that were developed in the past? We can use it today. It may look a lot alike Curiosity, but there's a lot of high-tech camera systems and drilling and sampling systems that are very top of the line. So even though the chassis of this rover is very similar to Curiosity, the technology inside this rover is a lot more updated. So we have some really awesome cameras. We have some sampling technology. We have various different tools necessary for taking samples. This is a very, very, very top of the line spacecraft. So I'm really excited to see what Mars 2020 or Perseverance has going forward. Now, what we're going to talk about next is a little bit about some of the things. We're not going to go into all the different cameras, but essentially what I'm getting at here is Perseverance has a lot of really cool technology, but it's not all developed by the United States. We have countries like Norway, Spain, France. These countries have also worked together. The European Space Agency has worked together to develop the various different cameras and sensors necessary for this spacecraft to function correctly. It has calibration instrumentation, it has instruments to locate and recognize certain structures. It has the ability for homing in and it's just lots of different electronics and gadgetry necessary for the development of exploring the planet Mars. Now, what's really interesting about I keep saying Curiosity, is Perseverance, is that, of course, we have a situation going on right now. We have the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of people have been greatly affected by this. So JPL and NASA wanted to put a plaque on Perseverance, essentially celebrating and thanking the healthcare and essential workers during the pandemic, which is really cool. The other thing that's really neat about Perseverance is that a little while ago, NASA released this thing online where you can actually submit your name to NASA, and what they will do is they will put together a little, essentially, storage unit on Perseverance that contains your name. You actually, so if you submitted one, you got this really cool certificate. It has, Perseverance's face on it, or, the cameras and sensors that look like a face, if you will. And then it says, hey, Derek Demeter is going to Mars, which is really cool. It's a passport to Mars. So that's actually there. So if there are aliens on Mars, or life on Mars, or if there's aliens in the future, or when humans eventually make their way to Mars, they'll be able to take a look at that and they'll see who actually is on Mars. So for those that actually did it, you will have your name on Mars, which is pretty cool. So now here's the timeline for Mars 2020. So July 2020, we are going to be sending Perseverance on the Atlas V rocket. That is a ULA rocket. And as I said earlier at the very beginning, right now, the Atlas V rocket is experiencing some technical difficulties, and they're trying to assess the situation. They're hoping to get now a launch window at the end of July, early August. They're pushing the limit because they can't really launch much after that, because the window in which the rocket can get to Mars, which is about 7 months, will be pushed that. We'll reach that point where eventually the length of time it will take to get to Mars is longer, and that's definitely not something we want to have done. So right now it's looking at the late July, early August is going to be where we're hopeful that the launch will happen. Now, what happens if we miss this launch window? Well, unfortunately, we can't just send a spacecraft to Mars. We just can't do that. It's not like you see in the science fiction movies where you can just launch something and it goes to the planet. We have to wait till the next time the Earth catches up, or in this case, Mars catches up the Earth, basically where Earth and Mars are at their closest again. And that's not for another 2 years. So we will have to wait until 2022 to send this spacecraft out to Mars. We don't want that to happen. We want this mission to go on. So again, hopefully ULA will be able to deal with the issues going forward with this rocket, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. Hope it goes up. This will be really exciting. So we're looking now at late July, early August for a launch, even though it says July 2020 there on launch. Now, if everything goes as planned and we do launch the rocket from Kennedy Space Center, by the way, it's happening at Kennedy, not Kennedy Space Center, Canaveral Air Station. So it's just south of Kennedy Space Center, basically Cape Canaveral and Merritt Island. You'll be able to see this launch from here in Orlando. So, of course, you can go outside and look out over towards the east. You'll see the rocket launch. Now, what's going to happen is that the Mars spacecraft is going to essentially cruise for about 7 months, and it will arrive in February of 2021. As it does that, eventually the spacecraft will be deployed, and at this point, it will enter and ascend or descend down to the surface. Now, later on, I have a really cool video that kind of shows this really interesting descent and the accuracy of this, and it's really amazing. We actually did this with the Curiosity spacecraft. We're going to do it again with Perseverance, but the difference is that the landing zone of Perseverance is much smaller, so the accuracy has to be really, really, really good. If you look here, it says landing ellipse. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. If everything goes as planned and it enters and descends and lands correctly, we'll begin to start doing our surface missions, and we'll be able to start collecting samples and caching them. And we'll talk about what it's going to be doing. What the mission's purpose is. It's going to actually take samples, and they're going to essentially Perseverance is going to be caching them on the surface, leaving them there on the surface. That eventually another mission later on in the 2020s will actually collect them and return them back to Earth. So this is actually going to be a multiple type mission. It's not Perseverance mission is not completed until another mission is sent back down to Mars to collect those samples and bring them back to Earth. So here's some of the mission objectives of Perseverance. Again, looking for geology. We're looking for what Mars looked like in ancient times. Looking and comparing that to Earth. We're looking for evidence of maybe fossils or the byproducts of ancient life, similar things that we find here on Earth. We're going to be sampling these pieces. If we find good evidence, we'll bore some holes, we'll sample them, we'll be able to create these caches, which then will be collected again. And of course, we want to look at the conditions found there today and find out whether or not, is this a good place we could potentially send humans to as well. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and skip this slide here because essentially I kind of talked about that in the last slide. But one of the things I do want to talk about is again, one of the biggest components of this mission is to look for ancient life. And here on Earth, we find these structures called stromatolites, and this is a picture of a stromatolite. And stromatolites are kind of like coral. They have been able to take material from around them, usually oxygen and other gases, and they're able to convert that into their food, and then they're able to basically create a byproduct that creates basically a rock material. So the stromatolites are basically the byproduct of ancient microbial life, what we call cyanobacteria, and they were able to actually absorb carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of the Earth and release oxygen as a byproduct. It's basically the earliest form of photosynthesis, if you will. And what we want to look for is we want to look for similar types of events that were happening on Mars. We call these biosignatures. We're looking for ancient biosignatures that happen on Mars that show that there was once ancient life. So things that would not occur naturally without some process of life. So this is essentially what the main one of the main purposes of the Perseverance mission is to look for these kind of things like stromatolites or something like it. So again, we have several different types of material. We find calcium, we find iron, we find silica. Again, byproducts from this development of these microbes called cyanobacteria on Earth. So again, we want to look for these deposits. We want to see could have life been able to use the environment it was in on Mars to create these byproducts. So pretty cool. And one of the things that Perseverance is really going to focus on is sampling material. So Perseverance has all these really cool sample tubes that you see here, about 42 of them. And what it will do is it will use its turret, which contains a coring drill as well as some other instrumentation. So if it finds something it really is interested in, it will be able to bore into the ground and basically essentially suck up the material and put them into these storage tubes. And then what it will do is it will cache these tubes in a location that eventually a future mission will be able to extract and take it back to Earth. So here's a close-up image to one of these sample tubes here. So essentially here you have the coring bit. It's going to be able to drill into the surface. It's going to be able to pulverize the material. This is not a lightsaber. I know it kind of does look like a lightsaber you see in Star Wars. But what it is essentially what it will do is this has almost like almost a vacuum cleaner type thing. It will be able to suck this dirt into these tubes, and eventually it will be able to cache it. So again, this is kind of giving you an idea of the material that it will be able to break the core samples. Essentially, it doesn't want to completely turn it into dust. It wants to break it up into fine sample sizes so we can actually analyze the rock here on Earth. So eventually in the future, at the end of this century, we're hoping to actually have really cool core samples, rock samples from Mars. I think that's going to be really neat in the future. So the landing site that we have for the Mars 2020 lander is the Jezero crater, which is this location right here. And the question is, why was Jezero crater selected? Well, when we zoom into the Jezero crater here, we see what appears to be lowlands. Primarily, we think that this was once an ancient either lake or inlet sea. And if we zoom in even more in this tiny little area right here, we can see a delta. Now, what's the big deal about a delta? Well, if you look over here on the left, you can actually see this used to be an ancient river. Just like you would see on Earth, you would have river flows down from highlands, and eventually they would empty out into these deltas or alluvial fans, if you will. And when this happens, these delta and alluvial fans will deposit material that was eroded from these river deposits. So over time, the river deposits would accumulate into the deltas. So you have this rich layer of all kinds of ingredients. And this is a great place to look for ancient life, different other conditions that what Mars was like in ancient times. This is a really nice place for all the things that Perseverance needs to do. Now, the scariest part about the mission of any of these missions is the descent and landing of this mission. This is the 7 minutes of terror. This is the most dangerous part of this entire mission, getting the robot on the surface. And being that this rover is about the size of a small car, it can't bounce on the surface like Opportunity and Spirit. Spirit and Opportunity actually fell down basically by essentially these inflated balls that basically like a beach ball bounce on the surface and made it down. You can't do this with a very, very heavy spacecraft like this, and something that, by the way, contains radioactive material. So you actually have to gradually, very gently bring it down. And the idea is to do it by using what's called a sky crane or a rocket crane. And the idea is that when the spacecraft finally makes its way just a few miles above the surface of the planet, it actually releases this right here, and using retrojets slows the spacecraft down pretty much to very, very slow speed. Only maybe 20 miles an hour or so. And then the idea is to essentially lower the spacecraft down, or the rover, down to the surface. So now, can you imagine all this is automated? It's programmed into the system. So this is why they call it the 7 minutes of terror, because everything has to run like clockwork. Everything has to run perfectly. Everything has to be synchronized. It has to be perfect. And essentially, the landing precision has to be much better with this mission, because unlike Curiosity, unlike Spirit and Opportunity, where it was mostly a flat area and it spent a lot of time exploring, Perseverance is going to be in an area that has a lot of little like cliffs and rocks and all kinds of things and valleys. you want to make sure that you land this thing in an area that's nice and flat and soft. So you really have a very small area to land this thing. Look at it, it's only about 7 kilometers, or about only a few miles wide to get this accuracy. So this is something that you have to plan this really, really, really well. So essentially the way it's going to work is it actually has several sensors. As the spacecraft makes its way into the atmosphere of Mars, it's going to use what's called, it's actually going to take various images. And kind of like what we use with autonomous vehicles today, those images will actually compare it to maps that we've taken with the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. And it will line it up and say, okay, well, this is actually where this is where this is, this is where this is. And it will actually, in real time, figure out, okay, we need to move this way, we need to move that way, this is where we want to go, this is not where we want to go. So this is, again, using all this really fancy technology that will allow it to navigate to the exact spot that it needs to be in the Jezero crater. So again, here's the site that we're wanting to land, Jezero crater. And what, again, as it slowly lands, it's going to be taking images like you see here. We got a much higher detailed image, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play this here. And as you can see, as it gets closer to the surface of Mars, it's going to slowly change and deviate its position based on what it actually sees with taking these images. So it's going to be taking all these images over time as it descends down to the surface and modify its trajectory to make sure it doesn't land in, say, a crater here, or land into an area where there's a lot of rocks or things like that. So this is actually really, really cool. And we actually done some practice runs with this already in places like Death Valley. There are various different alluvial fans and deltas similar to what we find here on Mars. And we've done some practice runs because it's good to make sure that practice makes perfect before you do this. You don't want to just do this on the whim of your on a whim here. You want to make sure that you got something going on. So we actually have done some pretty cool practice runs in places like Death Valley. So here are the different types of cameras that are used for the descent. So again, you have all these cameras all throughout the spacecraft, making sure that it knows exactly where it is and how it will land. What I'm going to do here is, let me go back here. So what's going to happen is the spacecraft is going to deploy. This descent stage is going to happen. The retro jets are going to kick on. The spacecraft is going to lightly be brought down to the surface, and we need to do this in very high accuracy. So again, I don't want to stress enough, but 7 minutes of terror is a perfect thing to mention when in this little piece of time. But if it has success, well, that's great. That means that we're on for the next part of the mission. Now, what's also joining Perseverance is this little Mars helicopter. This is the first time we've ever sent a helicopter to Mars. How cool is that? This is Ingenuity. And what I have here is I have another video showing how cool Ingenuity is. Let's watch it. That was some epicness going on there. That was true epicness, because it is an epic event. So the purpose of Ingenuity is to be a scout for Perseverance. Perseverance doesn't travel very far, and usually you have to send commands to Perseverance. And by the way, there's a 25-minute delay one way. So for example, if an operator tells Perseverance to move this way, it's going to take 25 minutes for that command to reach Mars. Then when Perseverance executes the command, it will send a signal back to the operator saying, hey, I did what you want me to do. That's going to take another 25 minutes. So you can see that time delay is really difficult. So what Ingenuity is going to do is it's going to do all the recon first to look for places where Perseverance wants to go. So it's going to spend some of its time looking for areas. Okay, this looks really good. Let's take Perseverance and go over here, and so on and so forth. The other thing Ingenuity will be looking for is hurdles, making sure that Perseverance doesn't go into an area that it shouldn't go, just in case there's anything that we don't know have it. Maybe there might have been a dust storm or something that collapsed, rocks collapsed, or whatever the case may be. We want to be smart about it. So that's what Ingenuity is going to do for us. And what's really cool is that we've actually tested Ingenuity in a vacuum chamber that was set to the atmosphere of Mars. So again, practice makes perfect. And we found out that the helicopter does a great job in the Martian atmosphere. So I'm really excited about Ingenuity. I think it's going to be a really cool part of the mission. So as I said, the launch period begins technically this July, but right now we're looking at late July. The landing date is February 18th, but that may be pushed based on when, excuse me, when Perseverance launches. So there's a little bit of wiggle room on this, but of course it's going to happen. And if it does happen, this will be a very exciting event. So stay tuned. So that's a little bit, of course, we don't have much more information to talk about Perseverance because, well, Perseverance is going to Mars. And so the next couple of years are going to be absolutely amazing. We're going to learn some really cool stuff. And going forward, this is going to open up a floodgate of future Mars exploration vehicles, including vehicles that will take humans to Mars. So this is the web address here, mars.nasa.gov/Mars 2020. This will give you information about the Mars mission, as well as any information about launch delays or when it will actually go for launch. So again, hopefully you all, again, go outside this morning or tomorrow morning, or the next couple of mornings, look at Mars and just realize that there's eventually going to be a new robot heading, or robots, because including Ingenuity. So again, I hope that you all enjoyed my presentation this evening, and thank you for watching it. And what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen here, and I will, if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take them from you. So, Sarah, I think you might be muted. I'm not 100% sure, but...
Oh, sorry. Okay, hi. Hey, everyone. So if you have any comments, thank you, Derek, by the way, drop them in, or if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. We just have comments so far.
Okay.
Mauricio said this helicopter will be amazing.
It will be amazing. I agree 100%.
I was watching the video. I was like, "That's so cool!" Flying a
first time
helicopter
we've ever
on
sent
Mars.
a helicopter to Mars. So that's my favorite. I think that's my favorite part of the mission. If somebody asks, "What's your favorite part?" Well, and also as a fossil geek, being able to find potential evidence of life on Mars is pretty cool too.
So you can find the planetarium on Facebook at facebook.com/SeminolePlanet, or you can also go to YouTube, youtube.com/SeminolePlanet, and see all the different programs. They put out so many great programs. So
yeah, right now we are only offering virtual public shows on Thursdays, but we'll be starting our virtual star parties when our weather improves. Right now it gets dark really late. Doesn't get dark until like 10:30 in the evening, and a lot of times people are usually getting ready for bed around that time. So, but we are doing our virtual public programs again, starting at 7 p.m. on 7 p.m. on Thursdays. There are questions here. We got can the copter do video? No, right now it's only just video because video would be just a lot of it would be a lot of storage capacity and transmission capacity, even on Mars. with the communication between Ingenuity and Perseverance. It would just be a lot of overload. So it's just photos, and those photos will eventually be sent back to the operators on Earth too, to tell, hey, go here, go there, and that's a lot easier to do when sending things from from Mars to Earth.
So it's like a little winged scout.
Pretty much, it's a winged scout. That's its purpose. Next question. So, do you guys think we'll ever move from Earth to Mars? So the answer is yes and no. So yes, we will get to go to Mars, but no, it's not going to be in the droves of millions and billions of people. There's just not enough sustainability on Mars. We actually have a pretty nice planet here. We have all the air we can breathe, water we can drink, food we can eat. And really, Mars is a much different world. It lacks the oxygen and nitrogen that we need to breathe. It doesn't. Even the surface itself is inhospitable to life on Earth. If you breathe that dust on Mars, it can actually harm your lungs and things like that. And so really, we're going to have to build underground habitats, most likely going to Mars. And of course, obviously, there's just not enough resources on Mars compared to Earth to have such a large population. But we will build colonies on Mars, but it's not going to be millions of people, maybe 1,000 or more, or something like that. It's not going to be, if you think about like out west in the United States, it's very sparse out west, except for a few pockets. Mm-hmm. Similar like on Mars, you just don't have the resources to have millions upon millions of people, but it'll be interesting, though. All right. Our next question is, why Curiosity and Perseverance do not use solar panels to generate power? It's much bigger, a lot more electrical needs. It's easier. Plus another. So there's actually two reasons. One reason is that solar panels generate. Of course, as we get more advanced, our solar panels get more efficient. The thing is, though, is that dust and other accumulations will make the solar panels become less and less effective by using radioactive fuel, if you will. It creates more of a consistent consumption of energy. So you don't need to rely on the sun. You can technically run the spacecraft at night if you wanted to. It can keep it heated so it doesn't freeze. There's a lot of things that are beneficial with running something off of nuclear energy opposed to solar energy. But technically, you could do it. But again, just the amount of storage capacitance that you need for storing all the battery support for it is I think it's actually cheaper to do it through nuclear purposes opposed to solar. All right, are there plans to send a robot to the brine? I've heard they're afraid of contaminating the area. That's a good question, Mauricio. I'm not really sure if there's anything at the moment, but I would imagine, that's why when NASA and other space organizations go to Mars, they do a really good job at making sure everything is sterilized before they put it in. And of course, yeah, that's one of the questions we want to ask ourselves is, if we go to Mars, are we potentially going to bring a bacteria to Mars and we're going to get false positives? That's a good thing, but usually they do a really good job. That's why you got to put on these clean suits and all this stuff, and you got to sterilize everything. I would probably say a clean room in NASA is probably the safest place to go for COVID-19, because you want to make sure that everything is sterilized. But no, and with all jokes aside, it is a very important thing that we make sure that everything is sterilized. But that would be cool to go back to surface and look for that briny material. But we're hoping that in the Jezero crater area, because of the richness of organics and other minerals that are found there, we could find some briny material there as well. So we get surprised. I mean, Phoenix didn't really think it was going to find that when it landed. It was hoping to find ice, but not briny material. So who knows what we may find when Perseverance makes its way to Jezero crater.
Awesome. I think that's it for questions. So Derek, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge with our OCLS patrons. It's always great to have you doing.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to do this virtually, and yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to come out and give a program. And again, I hope all of you, I hope keep our fingers crossed that the launch does happen late July. So be sure to look out for that. And got some really exciting stuff going on.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to say goodbye to Derek and just finish out with a couple short notes. So I'll see you in a minute. So just a reminder, OCLS cardholders can participate in our adult summer reading program for the chance to win prizes by registering through the website that I'm dropping in the comments right now. It's ocls.info/ASR. And if you say that you attended this program, you get an entry into the giveaway already. So you already have an entry. And then also, if you could let us know what you thought about the program, and also let us know if you have any future programs that you'd like to see at the survey link in the description right now. And you can check out the Seminole State Planetarium, at facebook.com/Seminole Planet. That's on my face now. And youtube.com/Seminole Planet. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.